Hi, I'm Sylvia Mayer, an arbitrator, mediator, and attorney located in Houston, Texas, serving as a neutral in cases all around the country. Thank you for clicking on Mayer on mediation and arbitration. Today, I want to talk about mediated settlement agreements. To help us explore this issue, I'm going to use a children's story called Click, Clack, Moo, Cows That Type by Doreen, Cronin. But before I get into the story, let's set the stage a little bit in the context of mediation. So you go to mediation and you work hard all day long. A deal is reached. You get to the end of the mediation. Everybody's reached an agreement on what they're going to give or get. And now you have to document the agreement. The devil is in the details. And we're going to learn that lesson from talking about Click, Clack, Moo, Cows That Type. Now, I talked about this book in one of my prior recordings, and I talked about how it is a story that is based on Farmer Brown, who had a dairy farm. And on his dairy farm, he had a barn, and in that barn, he had dairy cows and hens who laid eggs. And the cows and hens found his typewriter. And the cows used that typewriter, hence Click, Clack, Moo. The cows used that typewriter to type out a demand letter demanding electric blankets because it was cold in the barn. And through the story, it goes back and forth. They're making demands. He says no. They say we need it. It's really cold. He says no. They say, fine, we're going on strike. He becomes apoplectic. And ultimately, because he needs the cows to give him milk and he needs the chickens to give him eggs in order to run his farming business, Duck, a third party, steps in as neutral to help them solve the dispute. So Duck helps the parties reach an agreement. And that agreement is that Farmer Brown will put the electric blankets outside of the barn. And in exchange, the cows will allow him to collect the milk. The hens will start laying eggs again, and Duck will deliver the typewriter back to Farmer Brown. Now, when we talked about this before, we talked about all of this, and we talked about how an agreement was reached between the parties that balanced their competing interest. And I said at the end, there's a plot twist that I'm saving for another day. Well, this is the other day. So here's the plot twist. Farmer Brown does what he's supposed to do. He puts the blankets outside the barn. The cows and the hens do what they're supposed to do. They give the typewriter to Duck. They start doing milk and eggs. But Duck takes the typewriter and types his own demand. We want a diving board at the duck pond. So what does this tell us? This tells us that the devil is in the details. In a mediation, the parties negotiate back and forth, and they're focused on what each is going to give and get under a settlement agreement. It may just be dollars. It may be other things. It may be changes to loan terms. It may be a modification to a contract. It may be something else. But it is really critically important that the parties are thinking about the issues that go beyond what they are going to give and get. What is the implementation going to look like? How does this actually get effectuated? What happens if there's a default? What are the terms of the default? Is there an opportunity to cure? What's the timeline? What are the repercussions of a default? Are there any approvals required? Perhaps one party has to get their board to approve the agreement. Perhaps another party needs a court to approve the agreement or a regulatory agency to approve it. What happens if there is no approval? You need to think of all of these things, and drawing from the example from the book, you need to think about what happens if one critical component is that some third party neutral is going to hold on to something of value. How do you select that party? What governs the actions of that party? And what is the process going to be for dealing with that party? Now, as mediator, I am in a position where I can ask some of these questions. It is very common that I'll say, have you thought about how you're going to handle a default if it's a payment issue? But I have not lived this dispute. I have not lived this problem. The people who are living the problem, the parties and their counsel, their advocates, really need to think about these issues prior to mediation. But as we are documenting the settlement, they really need to be thinking about what else needs to go into the mediated settlement agreement beyond the basic what each side is going to give and get. And you have to think about all of these things so that you will not find yourself in a position like Farmer Brown, who had to install a diving board at the duck pond. Thank you for joining me today. Please connect with me on LinkedIn or subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you have any questions, please comment below.